All right.
And we're live.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up for What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. Episode 154, and I'm
Whew.
joined this week by a man who's doing daily content in the context of this season, John. I tip my cap to you, as I said to you earlier in the week, but John Hickman from Locked On Texans. John, how you doing?
Doing good, man. Doing really good. It's 4:10 here in Houston and about 10 p.m. over, across the pond where you are. So I know there's a huge time difference, but I don't think there's a pain difference in terms of the pain that has been causing a lot of Texan media members and fans, the agony just watching this team play losing football and build a losing culture.
Yeah, I got two teeth taken out last week. And it probably wasn't as bad as watching some of the Sunday stuff. I'll be honest, I've watched a bit of it back in terms of just like not in any detail that I normally do. I turned off after the third successive game, going three and out three times or near enough. I think it's pretty much that. I turned it off. Flicked back on a couple of times later on. So if you are listening again this week, and as I said at the end of the podcast, these people don't deserve you. So if you're still sticking with them, you're
Kudos to you.
yeah, you're far better people than the club deserves. I think right now, and it's pretty tough. But I was trying to explain this to somebody yesterday, John, when I was watching the game with us. I don't really know at what point the wheels fell off, because you think against Eagles came in energy Thursday night football undefeated, didn't look so bad. Okay, we were never close. We were never going to win the game, and it's been pretty much the theme for every game. And the scoreboard again was condensed versus actually the true difference. But end of the day, like two hardly played the second half, if at all. And you got a 7 round pick in there. So, but I don't know how it just kind of collapsed, and it's ever since the bye. It's not been great. You had a sort of okay performance in Vegas, and it's just completely the wheels have come off, and I can't quite put my finger on anything particular. Would you put it down to anything?
Man, I just look at the performance by the offensive line. The last 4 to 5 games, man, they've had a tough stretch of taking on some of the best at their position. Jeffrey Simmons, Jason Hargraves, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams for the Giants. You go up against who I think may have the best defensive line in football, the Commanders. Then you look at taking on Christian Wilkerson and Raekwon Davis, a player who I like a lot. They're playing some tough defensive tackles, and these guys are, stronger than Houston's interior offensive line, faster, quicker to the spot, more explosive, and it's been causing them a lot of issues. Looking at the last 2 games, Damian Pierce, who has been the excuse me, the bright spot for this team, only 8 yards. So if he doesn't run the ball effectively and well, then this offense will struggle, and that's exactly what's been going on. But I think the inability to create a push up front consistently and protect whoever it is at quarterback now has really aided to why the Houston Texans have lost 6 straight games.
Yeah, it's not easy. I think, and it's tough to watch, and I think it raises so many questions. And we'll probably not talk about anything game. Did you take any? We'll pay it one question or one section. Did you take anything from the game this week that you can sort of take any information from in a positive sense and extrapolate that towards the future of Texans football, where you might be competitive?
Yeah, and I think it was on a missed touchdown pass with Nico Collins. They could have got Nico, but just a production from some. Like when we look at the season right now, you got to take it for what it is. And a lot of people are finding it very difficult to find, you know, some positive moments that you can take away game in and game out. But unless the NFL crashes tomorrow or Cal McNair sells the team, this team is going to be in Houston. And they're going to have a season next year and the year after that. And so we do have to look at potential players that can help this team out in the future whenever they do get a new franchise quarterback. And things of that nature. So Nico Collins, I thought, looked fairly good. Jordan Akins, I think he's a player that Houston should really prioritize returning back, not make him their top free agent signing, of course, but it's shown that this season Jordan Akins is your number one tight end, and if you do upgrade that position in the future, then a player like Jordan Akins can fit in and be your second and third string tight end and produce effectively whenever he has an opportunity to get the ball. And I also like TQ, the rookie Tegan Quitoriano, as a blocker.
Yeah, he can
I think
block
he's
some.
one of those tight ends that can really set the edge. And so I thought there was a few good takeaways. Malik Collins getting into a rhythm with 2 sacks. Uh, Mario Addison, getting into the action with a sack on Sunday, I believe. So it was some good takeaway. It wasn't a lot of good takeaway, but there are some things that you can take away that's positive.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's some small things, and I think it's all about the future. It was always going to be that way, but I think the reason why it's about the future and why this team is so dysfunctional, why this team is so poor on Sunday, is almost anti-competitive at times. There's so many parts of the roster, the composition of this roster just isn't competitive enough to play in this league right now, and that's evident from the last couple of weeks. But I thought during the week was a small microcosm of when they tried to change the quarterback. It was a microcosm of all their problems, and I think because you had Pep out there in front of the media saying one thing, you had Lovey saying one thing, you had Caserio on with 6'10", kind of hinted at it but didn't necessarily say much. You then had Kyle Allen effectively admit he didn't know he was going to be starting until the Friday, so you wasted a whole game week, and it's so dysfunctional and so poor. Unless this is just a tank in plain sight, then what is it? Because it's not a functional, performing organisation. I think just the fact that you couldn't handle changing a quarterback in front of the media in a public way that was communicative, to the sense that you didn't have to be over communicative. There's no competitive advantage. This team is not fucking good enough to have a competitive advantage. It's just not the case. So I think it was amateur hour again, and when everybody pointed to the fact that it was Jack Easterby that was meant to be at the centre of all the dysfunction, all the issues, ironically, since he's left, actually that has coincided with things going wrong now. I don't think he's got any positive impact on football, but at the same time, I thought it was just a really poor way to handle something pretty rudimentary and simple. But it showed you people not on the right page, people not communicating, different directions, and ultimately a lack of success. And I don't know what this says about the organisation, but it's really simple stuff, embarrassing themselves time on time. They embarrass themselves on the field, and that's going to take time to change. Everybody gets that, but basic shit off the field, you couldn't handle it.
You know what's funny? Same week, same circumstance. If we go up to New York, Zach Wilson, right? And Robert Saleh came out to the media and said, "Yeah, he gotta sit down. He's not cutting it." And that team is probably not probably. They are a more win now team than the Houston Texans, but that same situation, I think, is very similar. Your starting quarterback isn't getting it done, and that team needed to spark your quarterback. I don't understand why it was so difficult for him. Now you're hearing about them splitting reps at practice, and so if you're anticipating him being the starter, why wasn't he getting those first team reps? And I think a lot of that rust that we saw on Sunday with Kyle Allen just going 3-and-out interception here was simply due to the fact that he didn't get opportunity to practice with these guys with the one-on-ones at practice. But it's frustrating, right? It's frustrating. You look at this and it all questions their identity or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
Right. Nick Caserio coming over from New England and doing things a New England way. And I think so far, especially when you look at how things have been handled this season, it's all blown back in his face. And that was the perfect moment, I thought, last week to come out, don't say a bunch of words that may not mean anything at all. Say what the situation is. Say why you're making this decision to move and stand by it. You don't have to argue with, reporters in the media. If you're looking at Lovie Smith, for Nick Caserio, you don't have to say a bunch of words that may not mean anything at all. Like I mentioned, just say it and they have a hard time with presenting anything that's actual, factual, concrete. They have a hard time doing that, and they're having a hard time, putting together a team that's confident. Because as of right now, I don't even think these guys want to play football.
Yeah, there's definitely a sort of disillusionment in the players' eyes, and I think I think this season was all about rookie improvement and the fact that Kenyon Green's been awful for a month. It's been rotated in and out with whatever the fuck his name is. Forget him. Shouldn't even care. Shouldn't even know what like a Justin McCray, not an NFL level player at all. And I think it's a position where you have to look at everybody up the chain. And I noticed Bruce Cabina, who had the set two with Lovie Smith again. I did laugh, and not in a way because I thought it was particularly funny. I thought it was just almost comical in the sense of a guy who's very cool, very calm, collected, was meant to be a sure hand, a steady head at the top of the organisation to give us stability. He's now lost that completely by not being able to just answer the questions and get off. You don't need. There's no necessarily any need to sit and give it and sort of kind of bark at the reporters. They're only doing their job. This team isn't any good. Ultimately, you're responsible for everything on the field, Lovey. So you're going to be questioned. So I don't know what he's expecting when he walks in there, but what have you thought of it? Is it just a case of losing greats on everybody and he's kind of had enough, or is it something deeper, or how have you kind of viewed the last couple of weeks with Lovey in the media?
Yeah, I think the frustration is hitting everybody, man. I'm sorry. I think the frustration is hitting everybody. I think, man, with Lovie Smith, I'm not. I think the lack of him able to do maybe some of the things that he wants to do as a coach and maybe handcuffed because ultimately overall the bigger goal here is to land the number one overall pick. That's how they're playing. And for Lovie to respond the way he did against Brian Smith and the response that he had yesterday after the press conference on Sunday, it kind of makes you wonder, how much is he invested into this job right now? And then how much is the front office invested in him? Is he another David Culley? Where we looked at David Culley last year, and he was clearly just a face and a front man for some of the ideologies that Nick Caserio wanted to practice last year and get some of the things back in the Deshaun Watson trade, of course, but in terms of draft capability. I'm not 100% sure, but Lovie looks frustrated, and around this time last year, David Culley was responding the same way. Frustration. And again, I think a lot of these players are seeing that, and they're just counting down the days. Now I think Lovie Smith is counting down the days.
Yeah, and I think the last couple of weeks there's been a change in tone, not just because he's barked at reporters, but he's definitely sort of said without completely saying it that there's a lack of talent here. Everybody knows that we're not where we need to be. He's kind of put it in a nice way, but there's definitely a lack of playmakers. Everyone knows that, but I think that what you're doing with the limited talent you have isn't good enough. The offense was exactly the same as it was. You kind of put in what is effectively just another kind of backup type player in Kyle Allen. There's not a huge amount between him and Davis Mills. A lot of people actually said in training camp that were there that actually Kyle Allen was probably better than Davis Mills, particularly the long ball. And you saw that one throw up the sideline. And again, it's all when the other your opponent's taking the foot off the gas at that point because it was over at half time, 30-0. The fact that you clawed back 15 points to centre half is completely irrelevant. So I struggle when Lovey's there because he's getting pissed off with the reporters, but ultimately he's up there standing saying, "Oh well, we won the second half effectively," which we all know is not true. It's just it's clutching at straws, and I suppose he's got to say something, and he's not got a lot to work with. He's not got a lot to hang his hat on. He's not got a lot to. Yeah, but I think the job him and his coaches done hasn't been anywhere near good enough. There isn't, and it's curtailed the development of these young pieces. Jalen Petrie, Kenyon Green. I know Stingley's out injured, but you're hiding him in zone. You're not getting to see what he's actually got. You've got Garrett Wallow and Brevin Jordan. That draft class, bar Nico Collins, who you paid for in future draft picks. Nobody's contributing at that class. You're almost starting again.
No more.
Yeah, so you're almost starting again after we already thought we were starting again from a complete talent deficit less than a franchise expansion franchise would have from day one. You've not got to kind of pick a good veterans to come and kind of fortify and develop some aspects of your depth chart. So we're at a point now where we're almost starting again. So this is the third time. So people are getting, our fans everywhere are getting asked a hell of a lot to even give a damn about his team in any stretch, by any stretch of imagination whatsoever. So I just can't see with the way they're playing how you can possibly bring him back. I just can't. How can you? How can you ask anybody to bring him back like this? And you might be right, and they might do that. They might just change the coordinators and just bandage up, get the duct tape out. The bumper's hanging off the car. You duct tape it up, and you get it rolling again for another 17 games, which is a hell of a lot to ask. But I think when I saw Bruce Cabina tweet out that Cal McNair was in the press conferences, which is quite interesting.
Very
him and Hannah, because she's behind all the changes. We all know that. But is there a pressure there that's going to come, that's going to make a change? So first change, does Lovey go to the season, John?
Does he get the job next year?
Yeah, is he in a different role? He may take a step upstairs, but is he head coach next year?
Yeah, man, I think that if he does, I think this franchise has been pretty fair to their last two, the head coach and interim coach. We looked at Romeo Cornell, but if he does, man, I don't see him just being outright fired. Maybe they promote him up to, a front office job or an assistant director coach. I don't know, something how they did Romeo Cornell a couple of years ago. But to answer your question, no, I don't think Lovie Smith should return back this year after this season. I didn't think that Lovie Smith was the right man for the job in the first place. I thought that he was going to bring an outdated defense, which that's what he's brought. And I didn't think that his old ways, he would move aside from his old ways, and that's what happened. But my question to you is, because I don't necessarily want to speculate whether or not Lovie Smith will get fired. I will speculate, and I do want to ask you whether or not, if he does get fired, should it also be Nick Caserio opening the door for him, because he's going to follow right behind him, because Cal McNair has kind of cut ties with Nick Caserio. Three coaches in 3 years, one of which still was David Culley. I have never seen a general manager survive that.
Yeah. Well, everybody that listens to this will know I've never been, and still I'm not impressed by anything Nick Caserio's done, really. I don't think I think
Steven Nelson, good.
Yeah, but that's not enough to transform a roster. You need 10 of those guys. So big picture stuff. Has there been a couple little pockets of okay? Yeah, but we need big leaps and bounds forward on every aspect of this roster to make it competitive, to make it watchable, to make anybody want to buy a ticket next season. To anybody, if they're going to change those jerseys they're going to talk about next year, is anybody going to buy one? Because there's nobody worth putting on the back of them right now. I think so. Change is needed, I think, from a business viewpoint, because you've seen how empty the stands are. And we'll come on to this Sunday before we wrap up, absolutely. But I think from a business viewpoint of, you've got to sell tickets, you've got to sell merchandise, you've got to sell beers on game day, you've got to sell food and everything. You've got to have people in there. You've got to have sponsors wanting to sponsor. You've got to have people taking boxes. Who wants to be associated with the way this is going right now? So you have to insert a change, even if it's just to give baseless, thinly veiled hope. You have to make a change. And I think, would I fire Caserio if it was me? Based on the performance today, I don't see how you make a case he stays, because he's just simply not done enough. Now, before he set out on this major undertaking, as he described it, would I have always said you need to give him 3 years of minimum to give a full evaluation? Yes, but he's not done anything in this first, of the first 2/3 of that time, that projected time period, to suggest that it's anywhere close to going in the right direction. Now, the problem is, the only way you would fire him is if you had somebody lined up ready to go, and I just don't believe for a second Calhoun has that. If you look at the Astros, Click doesn't come back. there's a candidate name that they desperately want, still got a contract with a year somewhere else, or even though he's not in the building, there was a clear succession plan, and that's why they made the move. I don't believe for a second right now there's a clear succession plan in either or anybody's head in that position to make that decision if Caserio was to go. So I think based on weak ownership alone, he'll get another year. I've always thought he'd hire a third head coach. But it has to be his last if it is. It has to be his last.
But I mean, so I agree with you with this. I feel like when you are new to a job, that you came into a situation like the Houston Texans did, you really should get 4 years. Normally, I give 3 years. When I look at quarterbacks getting drafted, 3 years. When I look at these rookies coming out, 3 years. New coach, 3 years. New general manager, 3 years. When I look at the situation and how messy it was for Houston, I even thought 4 years was a good number.
Yeah.
But in your first 2 years, you have maybe devalued this organization prior to your arrival. The first year you hire David Culley. The second year, when you had the Kevin O'Connells, Jonathan Gannons, I think Leslie Frazier was in the mix this past year. I can't remember exactly, but
Cully hired. He was the last 2 years. Leslie, it was down to him and Leslie. And actually, do you know, funny you say that?
I would have left Frazier.
Yeah, that would have been much better than this.
I thought Frazier would have been great.
Yeah, and he's been a previous head coach. Okay, it wasn't the greatest. I think Minnesota he was in, wasn't it? And
he had a playoff year with Minnesota.
Yeah, and so I just think I'm willing to dismiss the head coach is higher because I think people are in many places that are far better informed than me and got far closer ties to people in the know in the club have said that both these coaches were effectively not wholly Caseros. I get that. I'm okay on the coach thing. I think you have to change it this year. Then you hire your guy, and now you're on the clock from a coach point of view, but from a salary cap point of view, from a free agency point of view, and everybody's like, oh well, I think he's a good drafter. Do you know what? I tell you what, if he's a really good and his skills are in personnel, he should be the head of pro personnel. He should be a general manager, and I think that's what people keep saying. So I think he's mishandled the cap by signing all these terrible middle of the road to bargain basement free agents who we know aren't good and on mass volume. And he continues to, not improve the roster. He's not improved the roster enough that there was a marked difference from 1 year to the next. And we can give all the context and everything we want to do, but you've got a guy you picked in the top 15 is looking lost. And is that going to take time? Yeah, everything takes time. So, I would be willing to give him another year with the premise, if I was Cal or if I was Hannah, and I'd be saying to him, look, Nick, you've got this 1 year. What are we going to do between now and the start of next season that people won't actually give a damn about this club? Because right now, you're not giving people enough reasons to do so. What's the plan? Where are you going to take us? And if you were fighting for his job, John, and you were in that position, what do you think he would say?
I need my head coach. I don't need the input or one or two other guys. I need a guy that I trust and believe can execute what my vision is. And from the outside looking in, Ewan, a lot of us don't even know or have a clear vision, a clear path of what that vision is. We don't have a clear understanding of that, rather, what that vision is. And he has to hit it on the coach. I've always just looked at the situation funny because I've never seen the general manager survive 3 head coaches in 3 years. But if Cal wants to give him another year, listen, Nick Caserio has to go out swinging. He has to nail it with the head coach, and he has to allow that head coach to run his franchise on the field how they want to run it. Right? This is my offensive coordinator. This is who I want a defensive coordinator. Same way the New York Giants allowed Brian Daboll to come in and he stole Wink Martindale and brought his guy. Like, this is what I want to do, because now if it fails, it's all on me. When I look at Lovie Smith and even David Culley, are we putting 100% of the blame on those 2 head coaches?
Yeah.
I don't think you can.
No, I don't think so. I think, if that's the case, then fine. Right, and do you know when he made the comments about I'm going to go down swinging? That was, I think that was the Saturday morning after the Friday that Deshaun was traded. I think from memory, and I think that was maybe a little bit of his frustration. Maybe some of the stuff that's been pressed upon him now, whether he wanted these to be out the building and all that kind of stuff, fine. But I think I think if he does that, and then they've got to say, right, well, who do you want? Let's go and make it happen. I think picking a head coach in the NFL is really difficult because I think everybody just wants to go after the most successful play caller from the previous year. But there's no better example than Mike Vrabel. You don't need to be a good play caller to be a good head coach. You need to be a strategist. You need to be a field general. You need to be able to see the big picture. You need to work with a general manager, but then you also need to trust and empower your coaches and coordinators and actually understand what makes a good position coach versus what makes a good coordinator, what makes a good coordinator versus, a quality control assistant or whatever it is. And those are all different skill sets, and some people are cut out for others. So I think, get some. I think you go a lot worse than getting somebody from the Shanahan Kubiak tree of offense, or if it's a defensive coach, I don't mind. You just want a leader who can come in and bring a good staff that's better than this. It doesn't seem like get much worse than this, but it feels like even a better coaching staff would get more out of these players. So if the first step is that, what do you think the second step is? Because ultimately, I think it's got to the stage now where it's certainly you're starting to see the articles already of poor Bryce Young. He's going to be drafted to Houston, but do you think that's a foregone conclusion? Because it looks like from right now, there is no way I can see them not having the touch wood. I hope they do, but there's very few reasons that give me belief that they won't be picking first overall, and they're going to get some results together in the final few games just based on the opposition alone. Is Bryce Young a foregone conclusion, do you think, come the final week of April?
Yeah, I think it will be. I don't think Houston can afford to pass on a quarterback in this draft. We've talked, we have like a Twitter DM chat where we talk, and I've been vocal about how I feel about Jalen Carter. However, listen, I'm a smart man, and every Saturday we see why Bryce Young should be the first quarterback that comes out. And then every Sunday we see why Houston needs a quarterback. And it has gotten worse each and every week in terms of Houston needing that quarterback and Bryce Young just being that quarterback. So for Houston, regardless of how I may feel or how anybody may feel about who should be the number one pick, it has to be a quarterback, right? I've heard personally how much Hamilton likes C.J. Stroud, how the Texans franchise likes C.J. Stroud. But I think Bryce Young has to be the choice. And if you draft Bryce Young, I think your second or third choice, rather, I'm going to say third or fourth pick, should definitely be a center. He's only 5'10", 5'11" with cleats on, I believe. He's got a small body frame. This is the NFL. He will take hits, and the offensive line that you have set up right now isn't going to get a cut. So you got to make sure that you get somebody that can protect him moving forward. But I think I can't see a scenario where they don't take Bryce Young or they don't take C.J. Stroud, and I think Young is the better quarterback.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think my general sort of indifference towards the club, I think, it's not easy doing this, and I say it with pain in my voice because I know there's many people that have kind of devoted a lot of time and money and effort and some terrible life choices at time to go and support this club for the last decade, and I hate to see it in this current state. It does pain me, but in ways that my better half said to me this week. She said that I'm surprised you're taking them being this badly. You're taking it really well this year, because in previous years I haven't, but I think you kind of build up a sort of tolerance to it, and now I just kind of I am indifferent. But I think ultimately, like, there's so many holes. I think I see it from both sides of the argument. I think there's so many holes, you need to plug them if you're going to be functional. But I think that's what free agency is for. And ultimately, the cost to get a quarterback is well beyond one first-round pick. We know that. We've just sold one. So if you're even 85% sure Bryce is the guy, you get him and you work out the rest on the fly. But I think we'll know which direction they're going in
I agree.
definitively if they replace the head coach in, after Black Monday, January, lead up to the Super Bowl. Pretty much all these head coaching over the course of the playoffs, effectively all these head coaching spots are effectively filled, unless you're going to the Super Bowl or you're deep in the playoffs. So you'll be waiting until they get knocked out before that. So, because I would hate for a position where they change the head coach and give Bryce Young or even CJ Stroud to Pep Hamilton, because he's going to be probably the first coach out the door here, because he couldn't make it work with Andrew Luck. That was clear. I think people had a nice romantic notion of him. They paid him a big salary to be a quarterbacks coach last year. It didn't work out. Seemed kind of obvious. So, like, even if it's still Lovie Smith here with a good quality, promising offensive play caller that you bring in based on the fact you're going to sell them on the first overall pick, is great. But I think you probably want to use that to leverage to get the best head coach you can, because
Yeah,
that's an
absolutely.
appealing. If that head coach is sold on Bryce Young or CG Stroud or whoever. I don't think there's any other two guys in the conversation from the bits of games I've watched so far. I mean, Will Levis is not in that conversation. It's not even close. And I think people will go, oh, well, the next year's quarterback class is even better. There is no guarantees, particularly in college quarterbacks. There's no guarantees these top two guys will work out, but there's no guarantees that even the guys that are, Cade Mays, who I watched the last 2 weeks, wasn't impressed with. I know he's kind of dipped off form.
And I
North
would like to
Carolina.
say I don't believe purposely being bad for a year ahead out, a season out, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
we look at Caleb Williams and can Drake May come out next year? Or is he? I think
Yeah,
Drake
Drake Mays will be
May.
out, yeah, next year. Yeah, North
He'll
Carolina
be
guy.
out. He's
Yeah,
having a good year right
yeah,
now. It's a couple of underclassmen, but that's in a season. That's next.
yeah.
Right? You got the opportunity to nail it now. So I've seen a lot of people say wait for Caleb Williams. I'm not a fan of waiting. If you got a chance to strike now, go ahead and strike, because you never know what's going to happen, like you mentioned.
Well, there's no guarantee, and even a bad team. So if Casario's not in a position to improve a team, which, okay, in another circumstances, did a similar or worse team win 4 games last year under David Culley? Yes. Could that, and don't get me wrong, all based on turnovers, a lot of it, but it can show you 4 to 5 games can go your way. That put you down to the third overall spot. That even doing that again, and that would be progress on this year, because there'll have to be progress on wins next year, because you can't do that for a fourth year in a row. It's just not possible. If you want to keep the business, the fans, the PR, you have to show improvement on that. That's got to be part of Casario's remit for next year, should he be here. So if you bring in the quarterback, it just changes the whole complexion, and I think you can never underestimate how quickly a team can look differently with a quarterback. I always remember the day Deshaun got injured after being blown up in Seattle, and just the difference in the team, even on both sides of the ball, looked markedly different because he wasn't out there. He didn't give a belief. He didn't raise other players' games around him to a level that all of a sudden your roster just looks so much better. If that's the guy, look, and I don't know if any of those two top guys are the guy, but if you're near enough convinced, you've got to go for it, because they're so hard to get. There's so few of them, and to have your pick of every single college athletic prospect from every pro football program, or from every football program in the country, to select who's going to lead your pro franchise, you've got to take the chance, I think, because ultimately you can work out the rest. You can find a Garden Fraser, you can find a couple of defensive tackles that are functional, that will maybe help you stop the run. You want to draft other guys, absolutely, but ultimately the GM's top 2 or 3 things, one of them's got to be find a franchise quarterback. And it was Thomas Dimitrov said, John, it is the all-consuming search until you find a guy. So if you've got a chance to do it, you have to take it. The rest of the stuff, as imperfect as it may be, it may take you 2 years to get it to a position that helps him be competitive where he needs to be. So be it. That you just have to go with the flow, because it's a lot of this is beyond your control, and a lot of it comes down to luck.
Yeah, man, it does. But they gotta been fighting the cold. They got to do their job, right? For Nick Casario, who comes from New England, and they find a lot of late round gems. I think this year is super important for that. Like you're gonna have to address the run. Malik Collins isn't going to really be a part of your future. Roy Lopez has, completely been phased out at times. Thomas Brook has been healthy inactives. Uh, Listen, at times Kurt Hennis has looked like your 1B defensive tackle. So they're going to have to find some guys deep in this draft. They got to bring in some wide receiver talent. And one thing that I really want them to do is go ahead and get rid of some of these disgruntled players. Of course, I'm talking about Brandon Cooks, but any of the players that won't add any real value to the future of this team, just go ahead and move on from them, and start fresh for real. Like if they don't serve a real purpose of the rebuild and getting back to a more competitive team, and they don't want to be here, just go ahead and move on from them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, they need to just find an identity on the ball, and they have to stop the bleeding against the run because it just kills every game. And that was the most ridiculous part of the second half. Is in normal circumstances against Miami, a team like that would just run the ball, but they knew they didn't even need to be as sure and as safe as that as a move, and they let a a seventh round pick in Kyler Thompson come out and just sling it. Because they thought, well, why not? This is a free hit. That's how bad this team is just now. That's how far they're off the top. So, yeah, is it going to take 2 to 3 years? Is it a bad position to put a young guy in? Quite possibly, but that's what free agency is for. Get rid of all the dead wood and just replace them. If they're not worth the money, pay 2 or 3 guys that are worth the money and find the rest out on value deals here and there. And I think and paying Pharaoh Brown $3 million to be on the Browns and blocking and winning yesterday against Tampa in overtime, all that kind of stuff. Don't pay Justin Britt to play one game and disappear. Don't know what he's got going on. All this kind of stuff. He's been wasteful with money that he could have carried over into next year and spent it then. So let's start being smarter about how we do things, hopefully, and see. But it's a long old off season. It's a shitty position to be in to be sitting talking about this. But hey ho. Anything else before we have a think about the Browns?
No, I mean, I would ask you, is there a coach you personally, you know, that
Well,
you
everybody
want?
would like D'Amico, I think, and I mean he's a great player, wasn't he? And I think I don't know where he is with the club in terms of he sued them because of that horrible field turf and that basically shortened or reduced the ceiling of Jadeveon Clowney's career after a meniscus injury in week 1 in that season. So was that 2014? So yeah, I don't know. I think it's so hard to know who the best leader of men is. And the irony is you've had like McDaniels on the other sideline there. You've had Kyle Shanahan. You've got Robert Salah. You've had all these kind of guys that have come through your building. You've not really, and Mike Vrabel being the worst one because he's getting. If you look at Tennessee's roster, they're consistently atop of the division, but they're not very good. They've got Derrick Henry, you got Tannehill, who you got to tune out for some time. You got a couple of good defensive pieces up front, and you can play a way that you can get enough pressure with 4 guys up front and drop 7 into the passing game and be effective and be really good stout against the run. And that's like the kind of basic formula now in the National Football League with the big trend towards playing cover 2 all the time across the league, and they do that. But they're strategically, situationally aware, well coached, well drilled, and they continue to get results. And I don't think it's that difficult, but you just need to find those guys in that mix, and I think that's where we lack the expertise. But if Casero's been in the game 20 odd years, he should be able to find that if given free rein. So just find somebody that can make it watchable, that can make it acceptable, and ultimately there's 32 of these jobs. It shouldn't be that hard to find good guys. We shouldn't be hiring a guy who's should never have been a head coach. We shouldn't then botch the process, then hire a guy in a panic because you're trying to avoid a PR storm, whatever the hell it might be. I don't know where they'll go. Just find somebody that can lead men on a Sunday and can coach and identify talent along with the front office, and they can work in unison, because you're going to have a guy who Caserio can lean on and trust to see the game in the same way. So it might be a New England guy. Do you know what? If it is, it's better than what it's been. We've not wholly gone down that route yet, so I don't know, but I don't have any particular candidates. Do you?
Uh, Not now. I don't. I really want to wait until the season is over and see how a lot of these guys end off their season. But Jonathan Gannon is still in Philly,
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
and
he's okay. I think. I mean,
it,
I think Casario, if he probably had free reign, he might have brought him in. I don't know if that was how true that is. We'll never really know. We'll maybe find out one day. But I think, yeah, I mean, would he be better than this? Possibly. I don't know. The defensive style's kind of similar to Lovey's, but a bit more modernised. So, yeah, I don't know, John. I don't know. But anyway, we've got the probably this is the last game. Well, I'll actually be going. I'm actually going to be in Dallas, so that'll be. Probably the podcast after next week's going to be a little bit sketchy, guys, until we get into like newsworthy items of the off season, because I'm conscious of the repetition that we're perhaps giving you every week. We don't want to do that. But this week will be interesting, probably not for football reasons, but we have the return of Mr. Deshaun Watson, a guy that I never thought you'd think and talk about him in the way we have done. He obviously had many issues off the field, which we'll probably not touch on. We talked about it a lot. It made this organisation just another layer of drama to it. But he's going to be back in town. Not going to say it was completely forced and planned behind the scenes, but let's be honest, it probably was. It's not on the TV because I don't think the NFL necessarily want to promote it as a headline game in this part of their calendar. But ultimately, his first game back is, of course, a return to energy after not playing for pretty much 2 years. What do you expect the game day? Put the football to aside, because I think ultimately that could be a very easy formula for the Browns. Just run it 55 times and you'll win the game by at least 3 scores. But what do you think the whole experience around the game day? Will people actually turn up? Will they vent their vitriol? Will they support Deshaun? I think it's going to be mixed. But what's your thoughts on how?
mixture.
Yeah, how do you think it will pan out?
I think it's going to be a mixture. There's still a lot of fans that blame the franchise for Deshaun's departure. There's a lot of fans that blame Deshaun for leaving the team after he signed the contract and said he was going to be there. And then you got some fans that just want the chaos. So I really think there's going to be a huge mixture of emotions, feelings, opinions. And I think that will be the game where the NRG Stadium looks a little bit familiar to what it may have been in the past when fans were coming to the team, to the games. But I think it's going to be a big mixture of a lot of things, one big gumbo pot.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really tough to watch. I think I mean, he's got. I just struggle to see anything than him being a little bit rusty because he's just not played. He's not really practiced with this team much apart from OTA. So he's had this big gap where he's just not been in the building, not being able to throw routes on air. He's not even been able to do the basics. He may have studied the playbook in his own time. I don't know what he's doing. He's bought himself a nice house out there. He obviously got that big signing check after we gave him one. So he's a very wealthy man. He wants for nothing. How much does he actually want it at this stage of his career? How much does he want to be great? Does he want to be legendary? Does he still want that after going through all this experience? I think there's so many unanswered questions for him. Obviously, with another win, Cleveland are teetering back towards one. Will be another win of 500 if they do come in and do exactly what we expect them to do on Sunday. John is just go and run the rock and just absolutely dominate us up front. I can't see any way doing that. I would love for them to be able to pull out a result and just have an unrecognisable performance against Cleveland. I just can't see it. I'm assuming Kyle Allen will start. Hopefully he can kind of bring some of that momentum against the kind of one eye shut part of the Miami defense. There's a lot of talent in that Cleveland roster. It's a complete mismatch. I don't know where Watson will be. He's the big variable, but he'll want to score. He'll want to win, but I think ultimately they can win without him doing anything, and I just can't see it being anything but a clear win for Cleveland. And it's going to be a real low, and I think. Do you think that if that is the case and that my sort of premonition of what the game will go like, if that comes to the fore, do you think that's a moment where it's embarrassing for everybody because it kind of just reaffirms where we are? And do you think it's got the potential to maybe engender and speed up some of the potential changes that we've talked about?
I don't know if it's going to be embarrassing. What would really be embarrassing about it? If you like.
If they're blown out, like, I don't know, 40-0.
Yeah, but I mean, it,
Just because of who it is and who's doing it to you,
I
not
could
the
see.
fact they're getting beat by an NFL team. I get that. Like, they're
Yeah, I
not.
think it'd be more embarrassing for Cal McNair,
Yeah,
honestly.
that's what I mean. Yeah, it is.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
Is he embarrassed to then make a change because of it all?
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. Like for this, if I'm Cal McNair, I'm looking at Deshaun Watson. You played in our face. You lied. Um, this was going on behind closed doors, and whether or not people want to admit it in their franchise, we helped you through a lot of that hard time while you was out there doing a lot of these things. Yeah, it would be very embarrassing. It would be embarrassing, and I think for Cal, he still needs to look himself in the face,
Yeah,
in the mirror, and recognize some of the things that he's done wrong. Um, Not only without Deshaun, but with Deshaun. And if Deshaun comes in there and the Browns completely, blow him out the water and the game is not competitive, then absolutely, that's
yeah.
embarrassing.
And I think that could be rock bottom for the whole thing. And then you got to hope at that point the only way is up. But I think if Cal's looking at this, ever since he's taken over from his father, it's been a complete slide to the bottom. And actually, we're below the equator. We are we're subterranean almost, and how far we are away from being respected and competitive on a Sunday. So this, if anything good comes out of this, because I always think, with every sort of adversity or a tough time, there's always kind of things you can take away from it that it could be silver linings. Maybe that's it. Maybe they will embarrass them enough to just move on, and I don't know, but yeah, it's tough going. But John, I thank you very much for your time, man. It's not easy. I hope anybody listening this helps you, kind of in a cathartic kind of way, kind of get through it a little bit. 1 week, as I said, the schedule will be a little bit checkered, and we'll be news driven rather than content driven. I think over the off season, just to kind of take a step back from it. But any final words before we head out here,
Yeah, man,
man?
I would like to say, I know it's tough. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. However, um, it's going to be that. It's a rebuild. There are some franchises, the Bills, the Browns. We've seen franchise Detroit being rebuilds for a very long time. This is kind of uncharted for Houston because up until they got Deshaun Watson, you look at how the franchise was operating, like they were good, making the playoffs. The 2012 team had some bad moments, but had a lot of good moments in the last decade. But Deshaun leaving was the actual start to a rebuild. And this is unfamiliar for a lot of Texas fans, seeing this is also the youngest franchise in the league. So kind of embrace the rebuild,
Yeah,
right? I mean, embrace it. Embrace the pain. Embrace the hardships. Laugh a little bit. Go to a bar and just buy a random drink for somebody that's rooting for the Texans, and you guys are both in pain. Embrace it, because if and when it gets greater later, then you'll just sit back and laugh at all of this. Now, we don't know how long that's going to be. We don't know if they're going to get it right next year. But overall, embrace the rebuild, because if
yeah,
you don't, you're going to be sad. You're going to be sad a lot. Like, even when
yeah,
the season is not getting played, you're going to be very sad.
yeah. Find ways to cope with it, and assure
Always.
yourself. I think that it's you're paying your dues for when the good times come around. That's what I keep
That's
telling
all.
myself. I don't know, what you'll be doing and where we will be, because life could change a hell of a lot for everybody by the time that happens at current pace. But it can change it quickly. It's all cyclical. If you're listening, thank you again for listening to Turn for What podcast. He's been John Hickman from the Locked On Texans. Thanks for John for his time. Thanks for listening. Hopefully it isn't too much of a mess on Sunday and we can take something, but it might have an ulterior ending. But thanks again for listening. Check it, share it, all that kind of good stuff. Write us a review, all that stuff. Do that for us. We'd really appreciate it. Appreciate you for listening if you're